Fortunately, I handpicked the people that I was talking to, so like I wouldn't have this problem. And they, even if I said something that they didn't agree to, or like something that, in their opinion, had to be seen in a more complex way, they just told me that. And then like they actually sometimes they made a really good point. So like what I prioritized was like talking with people that I knew would correct me if I was wrong, and I know that would challenge my views, not in a harsh way, because like obviously that's what I need for research. I need to slowly get into things.
Yeah.
Maybe I fucked up this podcast.
3, 2, 1, and we're on air. Welcome back to the Post Definitions podcast. I'm your host, Freddie Lancia, and today we're starting a new series on journalists in Georgia, the country, not the state. And I'm here with a very special guest who I've been excited to interview for a few weeks now, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, I am Sofia, and I am a researcher here for my master thesis on the Russian-Soviet occupation. And I also came here to Georgia as a journalist, like a participant of an online news agency, like news project that is called Meridiano 13, and just to cover the elections. Yeah, so this is it.
Great, thank you. Maybe you can start by telling us about like how you became interested in this subject of Georgia and also post-Soviet space, and like why you're so passionate about it.
Yeah, so like basically I did my bachelor in a totally different topic because I graduated in Russian literature. So my view was very like focused on Russia and specifically like on history. But then the war in Ukraine happened like in 2022, and it just problematized a lot the view that I had, because I realized that how I've been taught literature was very Russocentric. And so I decided that I needed for myself to learn more about the history of the USSR, and then like also to see things in in a more problematized light. And from that, I just began my journey with studying the post-Soviet space, and then I came to Georgia to do an Erasmus program, and that was history because by being here and by meeting like the Georgian people and learning about their struggles and also like all the narratives that exist on Georgian history, I just decided that this was worth investigating, and so that I would make my master thesis project on that.
Yeah, really nice. Why did you start with your interest in Russia at all?
Because like it started from literature. Like I started to read Russian authors when I was 18, like before beginning university. And since I did not have any idea of what I wanted to do in my future, was like I decided to choose literature and Russian literature because those books changed my perception of self more than any other like literature experience. So I decided to take it.
And did you always have interest in being a journalist?
Not really. I started with my master's. Like I realized that I wanted to explore that possibility. So I was actually doing a master in journalism, and then the war in Ukraine happened. I changed master, or forced to study the post-Soviet space.
And you saw yourself after that doing something other than journalism, or you thought you're going to come back to that?
I think I with this thesis, I'm also considering the research path. That's why I also decided to, apply for grants to come here to do it, in a more complex way. I'm not saying that doing it on a desk would be less relevant, but I just wanted to experiment more with like going on the field. But it is a work in progress. But I think that for my mindset and also how I like to perceive things, I think journalism is the best way for me.
This is your first time kind of really being in the field, right?
Yes. Like like the articles that I write, I usually, like I started to write when I came back from Georgia, which was last year in February, and I started to write things about what I experienced here, and but also like from abroad. So like it was kind of a diary, like a recollections of the thing that I did here when for during the Erasmus, that in which I basically deepened my knowledge on those things, writing those articles.
So you did research and you combined that with your personal experiences?
Exactly.
That's very cool. And what do you think, like, what in general, this might be a really hard question, can be learned better through research and what better through experience?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think that so through experience first, I think you have a perception of things that you cannot have only by studying on a piece of paper. I think they're equally important in different ways, but I think experience is such a way to understand way better the complexity of the thing that you're studying. But also with studying, you have a basis ground of knowledge and understanding of like historical process and other things that are fundamental to like see how people react to certain circumstances of the present and how people behave. I don't know, in a city such as Tbilisi, for example. So I think like experience is good on a to understand people on a personal level, but you need the context that you can only acquire through research and studying.
And that kind of experience you gained as a foreigner.
Yes.
And we talked about a little bit yesterday about like the difference between being a foreigner and a local and then doing research in a place. And I want to come back to that. But one thing you mentioned was like the emotional connection. And you said that maybe it's sometimes good to be a little bit further away from the situation so you're not so emotionally attached to be a foreigner researching. How did the emotions play a role as you like actually became connected to Georgia? Because you had like a real personal experience here. And like, how did that help and hinder research?
I think I think it's important like to come here. Like it was important for me to come here without like any that much prior knowledge but research, because I had the chance to see some contradictions. It's contradictions in historical narratives, contradictions and complexity in what people desired, like for the future of the country, for example, like to go to the European Union. But what is about that? So I think I have the questions in my head pretty clear of which things did not work for me, and then like the further you know people and you understand the society, the further you understand why they have maybe limitations in their understanding of things or how complex things are really are. So like by knowing personally some Georgian people, knowing their struggles, knowing their like how they fought or their lives for rights of different people, ethnic minorities, and these kind of things, you understand that sometimes things are not as simple as you can see from an external eye. So while I do think it's very important for me like to talk about Georgia as with an outsider perspective, and to see some contradictions that can also be helpful to Georgian people themselves. It's also very much fundamental to not be presumptuous in your understanding and confront yourself with Georgian people a lot, because sometimes maybe it's just you're just mistaken. Like you cannot really grasp how difficult is it to live in this country or how difficult is it to make certain choices. So I think I have the privilege to be objective in some sense, but also I think like the more I get emotionally attached to Georgian people, the more my view is, it's more difficult, but it's better and more real and honest.
Yeah. And how much of those like Georgian connections did you make through interviewing, and how much was it just through like casual life?
Yeah, so last year it was mostly to casual life because I was here in Erasmus, so the basis of understanding was both studying and exploring the country. But this year it was both, because since Tbilisi specifically is a very international city, you meet people all the time, and you have also the chance to meet like very interesting Georgian people. And of course, at the same time, the connections that I made last year, I also started to let myself known to certain kinds of people, like people that work in the media or in NGOs. And then what I had to do when I came back was just like regain contact with them, and just from them starting, like through the interviews, starting to get other names and then other names, and that's how it worked. So I would think it's equal.
Yeah, very cool. Being in a country full of people that you could interview, how did you decide who to interview?
Like, of course, like people that are relevant for my thesis topic, like that's of course like is one thing. But also on the other hand, like if I had to look at more on a journalistic perspective, it mattered a lot what was happening right now. When we arrived here, there's the like hunger strike of the miners of Shukruti started. So
Do you want to
obviously,
explain that a little bit?
yeah.
Because I guess our viewers don't know.
Basically, like there is this municipality, it is called Municipality of Chiatura, in which there is this village of Shukruti, where a lot of new mines were opened. They were not really new mines, but mines that were like made during the Soviet times and then closed because it created problem with the soil and with its degradation. And since these mines have opened, villagers in Shukruti have experienced literally like the destroying of the natural habitat of their land, and houses have been englobed into the earth. So they were starting to they've been protesting for years, but this time they were protesting again because this thing is going on a very concerning rate and the risk to lose everything. So they started to do an hunger strike in front of the parliament. And
so then you chose people to interview around that.
Also, like I also had, an interesting, because I think despite all the things that I thought I would do here before coming here, then reality can be a very different fact, or there can be like so many complexities to it that I didn't realize before coming, because sometimes you don't know there are people that are starving in front of the parliament. You just have to see them. So like things change on the basis of what's happening here.
Did you have any hard moments where you're like, I should have known this, or like, why, like, I don't know, like, what struggles did you deal with when it came to like specifically your personal identity and being here?
I think I don't have. I mean, I had personal struggles in the sense that, of course, despite all the discourses that we made about being useful to be a foreigner and to confront yourself with Georgian people, so we can help each other basically in understanding things. It still feels like sometimes that that is difficult for me to understand things since I'm not a Georgian. So am I really am I really understanding things enough? Am I the right person to talk about these things? Can I say some things without hurting people's feelings? Because I know how the relationship with Georgians and Russians is complex. So can I ask them about that? I feel like now it's way better than last year. Like there is more of a silent, accepting of things. Because now, I feel like the enemy has been shifted, from being part of the Russian community to being Russia and connection with the, Georgian Dream Party. But yeah, it still feels like sometimes it feels I'm not doing enough. Sometimes I think that I'm saying too much and maybe I'm wrong.
Did you ever actually run into a problem, or was it all fear? Did you ever ask a question that offended someone, or say something that was wrong and you, or are you just overcoming it all the time?
Fortunately, I handpicked the people that I was talking to, so I wouldn't have this problem. And even if I said something that they didn't agree to, or something that, in their opinion, had to be seen in a more complex way, they just told me that. And then they actually sometimes they made a really good point. So what I prioritized was talking with people that I knew would correct me if I was wrong, and I know that would challenge my views, not in a harsh way, because obviously that's what I need for research. I need to slowly get into things.
Yeah. Yeah, for people to teach you things and not and for
Exactly.
that not to be a problem, to have discussions.
Yeah, exactly. Because I need to learn. Like the basis also of understanding of what I'm doing right now is that I'm not here to impose my view on anything. I'm not an expert, but to learn from people and to see from people which are the relevant questions that maybe I didn't even consider.
That's such a valuable perspective because if someone came here thinking that they're an expert and maybe they did know more than you, they might not do as good research as you.
Yeah, I think also people would be less inclined to talk with them because like there has been an electoral like a diaspora of journalists and people that came here for elections, and there were like very mixed feelings about that, like from the part of Georgian people, because while it's very good that Georgia was on the spotlight, it's still like people that you're not sure if they have a complete understanding of what's happening, but. Like fortunately, the majority of people that came here are experts of the region, so I think this was done like pretty well.
Yeah. Do you think it's good, like, how many researchers came here and, like, it's important? How many, like, how many times the same topic was kind of reported on by by different people? Is that like part of a journalistic process that you guys talk about, or is that just like something that happens?
I think like so like in this case like there are not that many researchers, like there were like mainly journalists. Like research is a more like long thing. Um, since I'm doing both, like to me it's like kind of mixed, but there are people that came here like especially during lectures exclusively to do like journalistic work, which I think it's very good also to change the perspective of like the national audience, because for example I have a friend which is a Lithuanian journalist, and the question of like Georgia and Russia is very complex for Lithuanians, because they also have a trauma in the past of the Soviet occupation, so they empathize a lot with both Georgians and of course Ukrainians. But now, before the war, this situation was already like kind of staggering, but after the war, like it's polarized a lot in completely demonizing Russia, which it's understandable. But now they're searching for more complex point of views. So while before, like the narrative could be only black and white, during this election has become more complex, and this is thanks to like the journalist work. And so like I think I've obviously like don't know, I didn't analyze every journalist that came here what they write about, but I think like for foreign journalists it's very important to change the perception of some things, especially because like the struggle of Georgia and Russia is way bigger than the struggle of Georgia and Russia. It's an historical question, it's a moral question for some people, and for some it just doesn't exist because there are people that believe that like the people that some people that voted for Georgian Dream, that's like it's just good to keep Russia at bay, but it's not anymore a relevant question.
Are there any ways that you think of that you specifically brought your perspective into your project?
I think so because in my project I'm really hopeful that I actually will manage to bring my personal experience into life. But what I would say right now is that I'm not really focused on how my personal perspective would be relevant, like I don't know, in the things that I wrote online or in my research, but rather how my personal perspective and an impact talking with people, like with the people I interviewed or just the people that I, randomly talk in the street about, because it also happens that you're in a bar and suddenly these topics came out, or even without me saying that I'm researching this, that I'm also like trying to write journalistic about it. And it's very interesting to see when you're having actually a fruitful conversation and you both come home with something to think about. So I think this is also so nice to be here, because not only I interview people in a formal setting, but I can also like note down some things that I just randomly talk about with casual guys or girls in a social and informal setting.
Yeah. And you have to write like your first chapter or your first section of your thesis on like how your personal perspective might have impacted or like just you make notes on this. What kind of things are important to note?
Like all the things that we talk about already, like are very important assessments. But like, what would I add? Like probably that, like for example, in some occasions, like not in that many occasions, I also struggled with the, I don't know, with the with being a woman in certain settings. Not because there was really I was really in a position in which I would not be heard, but for example, I was also trying to understand what the Russian community and how the Russian community was talking about the present situation, and there was a conference about Abkhazia. And in like the history of like relations between Abkhazia and Georgia. I'm not exposing myself in saying that Abkhazia is Georgia or Abkhazia is not Georgia, and they were not either. It was just simply historic, telling the historical process.
Do you want to introduce this issue?
Oh, yeah, it's a complex issue. Like basically, like since 2008. Like the Russian Federation has occupied two regions of Georgia, which are Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and like since that there is like an unrecognized border, but now that works as a full border at this point, and this has been a collective trauma for Georgian people. And they still hang up to that in many when politics are involved. Like basically, for example, we saw in this election, the main strength point of the opposition to the ruling party, which is the Georgian Dream Party, they stated that the Abkhazians and the South Ossetian question had to be resolved, and for them the resolution was to reunite with Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and create also like there was different views, create also some policies maybe for language integration and this kind of thing, while like the Georgian Dream Party was more focused on like playing on the fear of war, because obviously it's been a trauma and a generational one, and to like desensitize the electorate on the Abkhazian and South Ossetian question, and rather make them choose whatever Russia would invade them, basically, because that was the threat, as they did with Ukraine. Or if they want to play good with Russia, let Russia have what it wants and just be safe. So this is an issue that has been going on for a while.
Yeah, thank you for introducing it. In case you viewers are interested, the last interview that I posted, I haven't posted it yet, but in the future when you're watching this I will have, Nicolas was making a theater play about this issue, so you can watch.
That's very cool.
That, yeah. So you were talking about being a woman, and you were introducing meeting with the Russian community, and I believe you were with a group of all men.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think in Georgia, like in Georgia, like it's really still like a very patriarchal society, but so far in the interviews, like also because I basically only interviewed women, like because in media and history they're all like were basically all the representatives are young women, which is very like in the liberal part of society.
That's very interesting.
That's very interesting. While in the Russian community, I feel like this kind of topics, especially historical ones, are very like are interested like or mainly like male, the male part of the community, and sometimes like when it happens in a very small setting, sometimes it feels a little bit awkward, and also because of the barrier language, because they're always in Russian. So combined with the fact that I'm all in a room with all men, I don't feel comfortable maybe in asking the questions. But this is not, it was not a limitation of the setting per se, but obviously it's a limitation when as a woman, sometimes in official formal settings of history especially, you feel like a little bit in a more vulnerable position, and also with the language barrier. So this is also one thing very important that it connects to the question that we were asking me before about difficulties and what I would write in my first chapter about things. The language barrier, because I know Russian, but to know Russian in an informal setting and to know Russian to discuss about history, it's a different thing. And like sometimes if you want to have discussions about it, my language is not enough. And so you may feel that I'm lacking.
Yeah, understand. So maybe we can talk about how it was for you to start the interviews. Like when I first met you, you were just arriving here and you weren't sure about how this was going to go and whether you were the person for the job. How has that experience been, and how do you feel now versus then?
Yeah, so basically, when I came here, I just finished my exams. So I prepared myself like on theories and to get a structure for the thesis, because I had to submit my research project. So like that was part done, but I didn't ever reflect on how I had to do the interviews. And so when I came here, and there was the urgency of doing a list of talking with some people as soon as possible because of the elections, like I believed that they would be too busy after the elections or in the weeks immediately before the election even to talk with me. So I had kind of to improvise. And I think that is very good, of course. Like the ideal situation would be at least preparing a bit for the interviews. I have like already like maybe a fact sheet or something like that in which I had like the topics of the questions at least pretty clear. But I just went with the flow because that's what the conditions let me like. My conditions were those ones, and I think it was actually good because I got known by people, and generally speaking, they were kind of happy that the interviews were informal, like semi-structured.
Yeah.
Because they felt comfortable, and many of them already told me that if I need their help or if they want to visit their center and work there, I can do it. So this is a very good thing. I don't think that, especially in research, but also in journalism, I mean, there are different types of interviews, but still, the point is sometimes is just to work with the conditions that you have, even if they're not ideal, and also in the understanding that maybe you're just starting to do these things. You're just starting to do interviews. You're just starting to do journalism or research. And it's not, it doesn't matter if you do it perfectly. You can just do it, and then for those things, learn how to do it better, like to wait people to finish talking, for example, or because then the transcription is going to be a mess, like also from a practical point of view.
Yeah, that's great. So did you ever like misprove the theories, like, or like the theories that you learned in class, like did they prove useful, or was it more just like I don't have time, so I can't use them, but it would be better?
Yeah, like from methodology for sure. Like I know that there's a methodology, and I know I didn't have time to prepare like according to that methodology, so I just didn't use any, and I just talked, like discussed, because I obviously having studied before the things that I'm gonna do for this is I know what I'm gonna talk about. I just don't know what the structure precisely is. So like I just did. I just talked. I just asked questions that were interesting. I asked like if people knew people that maybe were experts on this, and then like snowballed into things.
Yeah. You did mention to me though that a certain level of professionalism is a good thing. Can you say why and how so?
I think it's a matter of credibility mainly. Obviously, like when you're talking in official settings or like with historians that are taking their time for you and to discuss about things, it's important to be polite and also to present yourself as your role, because like I am a researcher, like I received a grant for this research, so this allows me to have some sort of credibility. And saying that, presenting myself as a person on a research grant, it's important, because then people would assume that I have a certain capacity and knowledge of the things that I'm talking about. And they, for example, we're not gonna waste time also discussing very simple things, because we're both like kind of experts, like of course on different levels, if I'm talking with an historian. So the conversation can be fruitful.
Yeah, nice. That makes a lot of sense. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about being a foreigner versus a local. Maybe both from the perspective of what would it be like for a Georgian to do the same research or project that you're doing, and also what would it be like for you to do something in Milan, where you're from?
Yeah, okay. Like I think like if a Georgian would do it, like for example, I talked recently with a girl about this, and she told me that she would have liked to do to specialize more in Sovietology, but she didn't have access to a proper education, because here there are like very good professors in university on the topic, but it's very complex for them to work properly, because generally speaking, like there is a very specific version of history that is accepted by the Georgian state or the Georgian education. So like to make it more complex will risk of you to be exposed to like also violence, because like it happened like of people that are trying to reimagine Soviet history, like in the Soviet laboratory, and that they were like attacked, and they were like spray painted with like red paint. So like to study the Soviet past, generally speaking, it's very complex and it can expose you. So like it's not the right environment to do so. So if you were a Georgian studying this, you also will have to consider that you can be exposed to this kind of like public judgment when it's not harassment, straight harassment. And also there is an emotional problematic, because like I met few of the people that I talked to were from Abkhazia, like they lived the forced migration of Georgian Abkhazians from Abkhazia in the 90s, and obviously this impacted a lot their view on things, and like generally speaking, also maybe Georgian people that didn't have to sustain this kind of like exodus. They lived in Georgia the whole life.
What do you mean sustain this exodus?
Like in which, like I was mean, like they didn't have to flee from Abkhazia. Like they didn't have to live like in horrible living conditions for years. Like this girl that I talked to, like had to live in a former Soviet kindergarten, and they didn't have windows. They just had a door through which like have the contact with the outside world. So like there are different living conditions, and this may like maybe you're not that focused on history as you are on survival, and that's one of the discoveries that I made here. That's just like, focusing on history is important for me as a foreigner, because I don't have to focus on survival like the majority of Georgian people have to.
Yeah, okay, definitely. And how about...
And Milan, yes.
You can take a break.
Yeah. And what about that? Like, I think, as I said, for Georgia, it also goes for Italy. I think that I would personally take a lot of, would be very interesting to have discussions with researchers on Italy, because they may see something that I don't see, because I'm too emotionally invested, for example, in the Italian political life, or maybe I have a certain political view, so I don't like certain, representatives of the government or representatives of parties, while they can give me a more complex view of things. And at the same time, like if I did research in Italy, I would have the same problems, not the same problems, of course, but I would also have problems in detaching myself from the things that I'm studying, and probably would have a more politicized view of things, because in Italy, the and this is a very striking difference with Georgia, but in Italy people have a very strong political affiliation and that influences things. So I would see a problem in that, for example, and try like to see objectively policies that I don't like. And I know which effect they had on people. Like my mother works in schools, so like I would be having, I see how certain reforms had an effect on her life, on her also mental health, and like overwork. So.
Would you be quite happy to meet someone from another country, like Georgia, for instance, in Milan doing research?
Yeah, it would be very cool. Like I think Georgians, though, I have so many problems that I don't think that I will specialize on another country right now. Like because it's it's these moments, like these months are seen such as like with an importance, like also moral view in some ways. That's what they're talking about, and I understand that it's the historical also like time that it requires. So, but I would be very happy, like a Georgian, like or anyone really. It would be very interesting. But also like from people from the post-Soviet space, generally speaking, I mean probably like the definition of post-Soviet space is also problematic. So like maybe just like former Soviet countries. This is more accurate. So people from the former Soviet countries now are focusing on, studying their own history because of the war. So,
but I do meet some people who are like, they're from here, they're from post-Soviet countries, and they're tired of it, and it's not their passion, like it might be your passion, and they're just trying to get as far away from that as possible. So I can't imagine. Like I know a lot of people who want to move to other countries for obvious reasons, like the ones you're listing, but also like are interested in other things that aren't just their
I mean,
own
of
problems.
course, like
of course.
that's what I would also like. I mean, you cannot live only in the past. So like if you want to escape from like the turbulence of your country, like I understand why you're doing it. And this is also a great point about emigration, because people like right now more than ever after these elections have been a lot of people are talking about emigrating in other countries to finally be free.
Yeah.
Which is I mean it's always sad, but it's understandable.
Oh yeah, totally. I have another question about the interview process. How was it to be in this form of conversation where it's not about you, it's about them, and you ask questions, and I think in normal conversation we don't experience this. How was that, and also maybe how did you bring that to like conversations with friends, or just how you talk to people, and what came out of that you had never experienced before? Yeah,
so like basically it's very strange because when you're interviewing people, you realize that you have the control of the conversation in some ways. As I said, like first, like for necessity and also for preference, I did it in the easiest way I could think of, like let the conversation flow for itself, not control it too much with like a structured typology like of interview, but at the same time like I'm having a different eye on the situation. Like my eye is the eye of someone that is gonna write about it. Like it's the me later in the future that is gonna put her headphones on and write down what I would have been told, or like write down the important points. So it's like my figure is like it's a double figure. Like one is me that's interested in the conversation, and one is me researching that has to ask certain things, or has to also practically like drive the conversation into something that is useful for me, even if maybe it's not where the conversation is going. But I generally try to follow the conversation as soon as
closely as possible.
Yeah, exactly. But so it's it feels like sometimes you're like there's a camera in the room, and it's kind of artificial, like in some parts of some interviews. But I think the best way is to start make it as natural as possible. and also understand that this view is not a bad thing per se. So like they can coexist. But this is easier though with like more professional interviews.
Which is not a bad thing.
No,
Oh, what view?
like I think both like trying to balance the views is not a bad thing, and necessary like research view is not something that you should feel guilty about, especially when you're interviewing like friends or people that you make friends with. Like sometimes I'm scared because I say, oh, or maybe they think I use them to get to, to get an interview for them, and maybe I don't appreciate the time that I spent with them. Like asking my friends if they're going to protests every time, because obviously I'm interested that they will translate me what's happening, but that's not only the reason why I want them there. I want them there because I genuinely like spending time with them. So I think this is something that gets problematic in the moment that you have also another sort of emotional connection with the person. When you are instead like interviewing an historian or like more like people that you don't know, it's different. Like it's usually way like you're high as a researcher. It's it helps you have a structure. It helps you have credibility. It helps you in so many ways that it's better. It's just better.
Yeah, very interesting. I think that pretty much is all the questions I have for the moment. Did you have anything you want to share or something you thought about?
Like about
Anything.
journalism or things. Like I think I don't know. Like I think journalism and research can like intertwine with each other. That's also a question that I've been asking myself a lot, because ideally would like to do journalism, but now I'm doing research and there are like different methods, but they can I think I'm managing to have like do a little mix, like using journalistic methods in research and vice versa, which is obviously like more useful if you're doing analysis and not like just recording of events, which is not what I have to do. Yeah, so.
So thank you so much, Sophie, for this conversation and the time. It was a really nice conversation for me to get to know you better and also just get some great perspectives. And I look forward to another potential one with talking more about Georgian identity. So yeah, that's it for my questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a very fruitful conversation. Like I'm sure it would be also useful for me, to gather like some thoughts in my head. And I think it would be actually great if we in your project of doing more episodes about journalism, we could see this, the things we talked about in so many different lights. So thank you so much. And follow him.
Thank you. Follow me.
Follow him. Bye. Maybe I fucked up this podcast.